Sarah Martinez wiped down the last table at Mel's diner as the neon clock buzzed midnight. The rain hammered against the windows of the small roadside restaurant, and she was the only one left. Even Mel had gone home hours ago, leaving her to close up alone. At 23, Sarah had been working double shifts for 2 years, trying to pay off her student loans and keep her tiny apartment. The thunder crashed overhead as she counted the meager tips from her apron. $18.47, barely enough for groceries tomorrow. She sighed and began turning off the lights when she heard something that made her freeze. A soft whimpering sound came from behind the dumpster outside. Sarah grabbed her flashlight and pushed through the back door. The alley smelled of garbage and wet concrete. She followed the sound, her sneakers splashing through puddles. Behind the large green dumpster, huddled against a pile of cardboard boxes, was the strangest creature she had ever seen. It was about the size of a large cat, but clearly not from Earth. Its scales shimmered between deep purple and silver even in the dim light. 4 legs ended in delicate claws, and a long tail wrapped around its shivering body. Most striking were its wings, torn and bleeding, folded against its back. The creature's head was elongated like a dragon from old fairy tales, with intelligent golden eyes that looked up at her with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Sarah's first instinct was to run. This had to be some kind of alien, and everyone knew the stories about the war that had ended 3 months ago. The Draconian Empire had attacked 17 human colonies before Earth's forces finally pushed them back. The news said all surviving enemy combatants had been rounded up and imprisoned, but this wasn't a warrior. This was clearly a child, injured and alone. The little dragon tried to crawl deeper into the shadows, leaving a trail of dark blood on the wet pavement. Its breathing was labored, and Sarah could see deep gashes across its wings and side. "Hey, it's okay," Sarah whispered, crouching down slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature's eyes followed her every movement. It made a soft chirping sound, almost like a bird. Sarah noticed it was trying to cover something with its body. She angled her flashlight and saw the remains of what looked like an eggshell, pieces scattered around the boxes. Her heart broke as she understood. This wasn't a soldier or an adult dragon. This was a baby, probably just hatched, hiding in the garbage because it had nowhere else to go. Sarah looked around the empty alley. No one would know if she just walked away. It would be safer for her. The government had made it clear that harboring any alien life forms was treason, punishable by life in prison or worse. The baby dragon whimpered again, and Sarah saw its golden eyes were starting to close. It was dying. She made her decision. Sarah pulled off her jacket and slowly approached the creature. "I know you're scared, little one, but I want to help." She kept her voice gentle and calm. "My name is Sarah. What's yours?" The dragon didn't understand her words, but something in her tone must have reached it. When she carefully wrapped her jacket around its small form, it didn't resist. It was surprisingly light, probably weighing less than 10 pounds. Back in the diner's kitchen, Sarah cleared off the prep counter and gently laid the injured dragon down. Under the bright fluorescent lights, she could see the extent of its wounds. The cuts were deep but clean, like they'd been made by something sharp rather than claws or teeth. The dragon's breathing was shallow, and its scales had lost some of their shimmer. Sarah had taken a veterinary course in college before switching to business. She knew basic first aid for animals, though she'd never treated anything like this. She gathered the first aid kit from the office and some clean towels from the kitchen. As she began cleaning the wounds, the dragon's eyes opened again. It made a soft trilling sound that seemed almost like a thank you. Sarah smiled despite her nervousness. "You're going to be okay," she promised, though she wasn't sure if that was true. "I'm going to take care of you." The dragon's injuries were worse than they looked. Sarah worked for over an hour, cleaning and bandaging the wounds as best she could. The creature never once tried to bite or scratch her, even when she had to touch the most painful areas. It seemed to understand she was trying to help. When she finished, Sarah realized she faced a bigger problem. Where could she keep an alien dragon? Her apartment building had a strict no pets policy, and even if they allowed pets, this definitely didn't qualify as a normal animal. The diner was closed on Sundays, giving her a day to figure things out. She made a comfortable nest from clean towels in the storage room, away from the windows. The dragon curled up immediately, exhausted from its ordeal. Sarah sat beside the makeshift bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of the dragon's breathing. Its scales caught the light from the storage room's single bulb, creating tiny rainbows on the walls. "What am I going to do with you?" she whispered. The dragon opened one golden eye and made a soft purring sound. Without thinking, Sarah reached out and gently stroked the smooth scales between its eyes. The purring grew louder and the creature pressed against her hand. For the first time since finding it, Sarah smiled. Whatever happened next, she couldn't regret saving this little life. The war between humans and the Draconian Empire might be over, but the hatred and fear remained strong. If anyone discovered what she'd done, both she and the dragon would be in terrible danger. But looking into those intelligent golden eyes, Sarah knew she'd made the right choice. This wasn't an enemy or a monster. This was just a scared, hurt baby who needed someone to care about it. She stayed with the dragon until dawn, keeping watch to make sure it kept breathing. As the first rays of sunlight crept through the storage room's small window, Sarah made herself a promise. No matter what it cost her, she would protect this little creature. She would give it the chance to grow up safe and loved, even if it meant risking everything she had. The dragon slept peacefully in its nest of towels, and Sarah began planning how to hide the most important secret of her life. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah found the baby dragon, and keeping the secret was proving harder than she'd imagined. She'd named him Echo because of the soft trilling sounds he made that seemed to bounce off the diner's walls during the quiet hours. Echo was healing faster than any earth animal would have. His wounds had closed completely, leaving only thin silver lines where the cuts had been. His scales were growing brighter each day, shifting from purple to deep blue to silver depending on his mood and the light. The biggest challenge was feeding him. Sarah had tried everything from raw meat to vegetables to cat food, but Echo turned his nose up at most human food. He seemed to prefer eggs, milk, and, strangely enough, vanilla ice cream. Sarah had started buying these items with her own money, telling Mel she was on a new diet when he asked about her grocery receipts. During the day, Echo stayed hidden in the storage room. Sarah had moved boxes around to create a small cave-like space where he felt safe. She'd brought blankets from home and even a few toys she'd picked up at a thrift store. Echo especially loved a small stuffed elephant that he carried everywhere in his mouth. The hardest part was the nights when she had to leave him alone. Sarah worked the dinner shift until midnight, and Echo would pace the storage room making soft crying sounds that broke her heart. She started leaving the radio on low so he wouldn't feel so isolated. One evening, as Sarah was cleaning tables, she heard a commotion from the kitchen. She rushed back to find Echo standing on the prep counter, having somehow gotten out of the storage room. Mel was working late that night, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped when she saw him walking toward the kitchen. "Just give me a second, Mel," Sarah called out, trying to sound casual. She scooped Echo up and quickly carried him back to his hiding place. "I thought I heard a rat. Might want to call an exterminator," Mel called back. "Can't have rodents in the kitchen." Echo seemed to understand they needed to be more careful after that. He stayed quiet during business hours and waited patiently for Sarah to visit him during her breaks. As the weeks turned into a month, Sarah began to notice how intelligent Echo really was. He learned to recognize the sound of her footsteps and would chirp softly when she approached. He understood basic commands like quiet and stay, though he responded better to her tone than her words. More remarkably, Echo began trying to communicate back. He developed different sounds for different needs, a high trill when he was hungry, a low purr when he was content, and a sharp chirp when he wanted attention. Sarah found herself having actual conversations with him, even though she couldn't understand his responses. The first real breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Sarah was having a particularly bad day. A customer had yelled at her over a wrong order. She'd burned her hand on the coffee pot, and her landlord had called to remind her that rent was due in 3 days. She was sitting in the storage room during her break, holding Echo and trying not to cry. Echo seemed to sense her distress. He climbed up to her shoulder and gently nuzzled her cheek, making soft, comforting sounds. Then, to Sarah's amazement, he began to purr in a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. The stress she'd been carrying melted away as she listened to the soothing sound. "Thank you, little guy," she whispered, and Echo chirped back as if he understood. That night, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't keep living this double life, constantly worried about discovery. Echo was growing, and soon the storage room would be too small for him. She needed help, but who could she trust with such a dangerous secret? The answer came to her as she was closing up. Dr. James Chen, the veterinarian who had a clinic 2 blocks away, had been coming to the diner for coffee every morning for years. He was quiet, kind, and had always treated Sarah with respect. More importantly, she'd overheard him talking to Mel about how wrong the war had been. How the media had painted all aliens as monsters when many were probably just as innocent as humans. The next morning, Sarah waited nervously for Dr. Chen's usual visit. When he came in for his coffee and blueberry muffin, she made her move. "Dr. Chen, could I ask you something privately?" she said, her voice shaking slightly. He looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Sarah. Is everything all right?" Sarah led him to a corner booth away from the other early morning customers. She took a deep breath and made the biggest gamble of her life. If someone found an injured animal, something unusual, and they were afraid to bring it to the authorities, would you help them? Dr. Chen studied her face carefully. "That's a very specific hypothetical question." "It's not hypothetical." They sat in silence for a long moment. Dr. Chen sipped his coffee and watched Sarah with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "This animal," he said finally. "How unusual are we talking?" Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. Over the past month, she'd taken dozens of photos of Echo, unable to resist capturing his growth and development. She selected one that showed him clearly, but didn't reveal the storage room location. Dr. Chen's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips when he saw the image. His eyes widened, and Sarah was terrified she'd made a terrible mistake. "Dear God," he whispered. "Is this real?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Dr. Chen set down his cup with shaking hands. "Where did you find him?" "Behind the diner about a month ago. He was hurt and alone. I couldn't just leave him to die." "Sarah, do you understand what you've done? The risk you're taking?" Dr. Chen's voice was urgent but not angry. "If the authorities find out, they'll take him away. They might hurt him or worse." "I know," Sarah said, tears starting to fall. "But I couldn't abandon him. He's just a baby." Dr. Chen looked at the photo again, then back at Sarah. She saw the exact moment when his expression shifted from concern to determination. "When can I meet him?" Relief flooded through Sarah like a dam breaking. "Tonight after we close." "But Dr. Chen, if you're having second thoughts, I've been a veterinarian for 20 years, he interrupted gently. "My job is to heal and protect animals no matter what species they are. If you trust me enough to share this secret, then I'll do everything in my power to help." That night, Dr. Chen met Sarah at the diner's back door. His hands were full of medical supplies and what looked like specialized food for exotic animals. "I've been thinking about this all day," he explained as Sarah led him through the kitchen. "Dragons are reptilian, but they're also clearly highly intelligent. His nutritional needs are probably complex." When they reached the storage room, Sarah called out softly, "Echo, I have someone I want you to meet. He's a friend." Echo poked his head out from behind the boxes, his golden eyes immediately focusing on the stranger. He chirped questioningly at Sarah. "It's okay, baby. Dr. Chen is here to help you." Dr. Chen knelt down slowly, extending his hand palm up in the universal gesture of non-aggression. Echo sniffed cautiously, then stepped forward to investigate. "Hello there, beautiful," Dr. Chen said softly. "My name is James. Sarah's told me wonderful things about you." Echo tilted his head, studying the new human intently. After a moment, he made a soft trilling sound and allowed Dr. Chen to gently touch his scales. "Remarkable," Dr. Chen breathed. "His bone structure, the way his wings are developing. Sarah, I think he's going to be magnificent when he grows up." As Dr. Chen examined Echo, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. She was no longer alone in this. Echo had a chance now, a real chance to survive and thrive. But neither Sarah nor Dr. Chen could have imagined the challenges that lay ahead, or how their small act of compassion would eventually change the relationship between two species forever. 6 months after finding Echo, Sarah's life had settled into a careful routine. Dr. Chen visited twice a week, bringing specialized nutrients and monitoring Echo's growth. The little dragon had tripled in size and now stood as tall as a medium-sized dog, though his wingspan, when fully extended, reached nearly 4 feet. Echo had moved from the storage room to Dr. Chen's veterinary clinic basement, which offered more space and better hiding spots. Sarah visited him every evening after work, and their bond had grown stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. The dragon's intelligence continued to amaze both his human caretakers. Echo had learned to recognize dozens of words and could follow complex instructions. He'd figured out how to open simple latches, turn light switches on and off with his claws, and even how to operate the tablet Dr. Chen had given him loaded with nature documentaries. But with growth came new challenges. Echo's natural instincts were beginning to emerge. He'd started hoarding shiny objects, collecting Dr. Chen's medical instruments and Sarah's jewelry in a neat pile in the corner of his sleeping area. More concerning, he'd begun showing signs of frustration at being confined. "He's getting restless," Dr. Chen observed one evening as they watched Echo pace back and forth across the basement. "In the wild, young dragons would be learning to fly and hunt. He needs more stimulation." Sarah knelt down as Echo approached her, his scales now a brilliant emerald green with silver edges. He'd grown beautiful, but she could see the sadness in his golden eyes. "I know you want to spread your wings, baby," she said, stroking his head, "but it's not safe out there." Echo made a low rumbling sound and nuzzled against her hand. Over the months, they'd developed their own language of sounds and gestures. Sarah had become fluent in Echo's expressions, understanding the difference between his hungry chirp and his lonely trill. Dr. Chen had been researching dragon physiology using old scientific papers from before the war. What he'd learned was both fascinating and troubling. According to these studies, young dragons need to fly regularly for proper bone and muscle development, he explained to Sarah over coffee one morning. If Echo doesn't get proper exercise soon, he could develop permanent physical problems. "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "We need to find a way to let him fly." The solution came from an unexpected source. Dr. Chen had a friend named Marcus who owned a small airport outside of town. Marcus was a former military pilot who'd been vocal about his opposition to the war with the Draconian Empire. After much deliberation, Dr. Chen approached Marcus with their secret. To their relief, Marcus's response was immediate and positive. "Bring him out," Marcus said without hesitation. "We'll do night flights. No one's around after midnight." 3 nights later, Sarah and Dr. Chen drove out to the airport with Echo hidden in a specially modified pet carrier. The dragon had grown too large for Sarah's car, so Dr. Chen had borrowed a veterinary transport van. Echo seemed to sense something different about this trip. He was more alert than usual, his scales shifting between blue and silver in rapid waves that indicated excitement. The small airport was deserted except for Marcus, who waited by an empty hangar. When they released Echo from the carrier, he immediately began sniffing the air and making excited chirping sounds. "He knows," Sarah whispered. "He can smell the sky." Marcus had cleared a large area inside the hangar for Echo's first real flight attempts. The space wasn't huge, but it was far larger than the clinic basement. Echo stood at the center of the hangar floor, extending his wings fully for the first time in months. Sarah gasped at how magnificent he looked. His wingspan now stretched nearly 6 feet, and his scales caught the hangar lights like jewels. The dragon looked back at Sarah as if asking permission. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Go ahead, Echo. Fly." Echo crouched low, then launched himself into the air. His first attempts were clumsy, wings beating frantically as he struggled to find his rhythm. But within minutes, instinct took over. He soared across the hangar in smooth, graceful arcs, his joy evident in every movement. Sarah watched with a mixture of pride and heartbreak. This was what Echo was meant to be, a creature of the sky, not a hidden pet in a basement. But seeing him fly also reminded her how different he was from any Earth animal, and how dangerous his very existence was. After an hour of flying, Echo landed gracefully in front of Sarah. His eyes were brighter than she'd ever seen them, and he was making soft purring sounds of contentment. "Feel better?" she asked, and Echo nuzzled her shoulder in response. From that night on, they made regular trips to the airport. Marcus became part of their small conspiracy, helping to schedule Echo's flights when air traffic was minimal. The dragon's flying skills improved rapidly, and his overall health and mood brightened considerably. But their secret was becoming harder to keep. Echo's appetite had increased dramatically with his growth and exercise. Dr. Chen was spending a fortune on specialized food, and Sarah was working extra shifts to help cover the costs. Both of them were showing signs of exhaustion from their double lives. More dangerous Echo was beginning to vocalize more loudly. His chirps and trills were turning into proper roars, even if they were still relatively quiet. During one flight session, Echo let out a particularly loud call that echoed across the empty airfield. Someone's going to hear him eventually, Marcus warned, and when they do, we'll all be in serious trouble. The breakthrough came when Dr. Chen made an unexpected discovery in his research. He found a paper written by Dr. Elizabeth Torres, a xenobiologist who had studied captured draconian specimens during the war. Unlike the military researchers who focused on weaknesses and weapons, Dr. Torres had been interested in dragon intelligence and social behavior. "Listen to this," Dr. Chen said, reading from his tablet during one of their evening visits. "Dragons form deep emotional bonds with other species, particularly those who show them kindness during vulnerable periods. These bonds can last a lifetime and often result in protective behaviors toward the bonded individual." Sarah looked at Echo, who was curled up next to her like an enormous cat. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means Echo doesn't just see you as his caretaker. In dragon culture, you're family. More than that, you might be what they call a soul bond. According to this research, dragons will risk their lives to protect someone they've bonded with." As if responding to his name, Echo lifted his head and made a soft questioning sound. Sarah stroked his scales, marveling at how warm they were under her fingers. "Dr. Torres is still alive," Dr. Chen continued. "She works at the University of New Colorado now, studying interspecies communication. Maybe she could help us." Sarah felt a flutter of hope mixed with fear. Involving another person meant more risk, but it also meant more expertise. Echo was growing larger and more complex every day, and she was increasingly worried that she and Dr. Chen were in over their heads. "What if she reports us?" Sarah asked. "Then we'll all go to prison," Dr. Chen said bluntly. "But if we don't get help soon, Echo's going to outgrow our ability to care for him anyway. He's not a pet, Sarah. He's a highly intelligent being who deserves better than hiding in basements and abandoned hangars." That night, as Sarah watched Echo practice aerial maneuvers in the hangar, she made a decision that would change all their lives. Echo deserved more than they could give him in secret. He deserved a chance to be what he truly was, but first, they would need to trust another stranger with the most precious secret any of them had ever kept. As Echo landed beside her, his golden eyes reflecting the hangar lights, Sarah wondered if she was about to make the best decision of her life, or the worst mistake she'd ever made. Dr. Elizabeth Torres was not what Sarah had expected. The renowned xenobiologist was a small woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that moved constantly as she spoke. She sat in Marcus's airport office at 2 a.m, having driven 4 hours after receiving Dr. Chen's carefully worded message. "Before I see him," Dr. Torres said, "I need you to understand something. What you've done is extraordinary, but it's also incredibly dangerous, not just for you, but potentially for all human-dragon relations going forward." Sarah felt her stomach clench. "What do you mean?" "The war ended badly for both sides," Dr. Torres explained. "The Draconian Empire retreated, but they didn't surrender. Right now, there's a very fragile ceasefire. If the government discovers you've been harboring what they'll see as an enemy combatant, they could use it as an excuse to restart hostilities." "But Echo's just a baby," Sarah protested. "He's never hurt anyone." "I believe you," Dr. Torres said gently. "But fear rarely listens to logic. The public still sees all dragons as monsters. One viral video or news story about a hidden dragon could undo years of peace negotiations." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "Then what do you suggest we do?" "Let me meet him first. Then we'll decide together." They walked across the dark tarmac to the hangar where Marcus was waiting with Echo. The dragon had grown even larger in the past month, now standing nearly 3 feet tall at the shoulder. His scales had deepened to a rich forest green, and his wing membranes showed intricate patterns of silver and gold. Echo was immediately alert when he saw the stranger. Positioning himself protectively between Sarah and Dr. Torres, he made a low warning sound that wasn't quite aggressive but clearly communicated wariness. "Hello, beautiful one," Dr. Torres said softly, staying perfectly still. "My name is Elizabeth. I'm here to help you and Sarah." To everyone's surprise, she began making soft clicking and trilling sounds that sounded remarkably similar to Echo's own vocalizations. Echo's head tilted in obvious confusion, and he looked back at Sarah as if asking for an explanation. "I spent 3 years studying dragon communication patterns," Dr. Torres explained to the humans, while continuing to make the soft sounds. "I'm not fluent, but I know enough basic greeting protocols." Echo approached slowly, sniffing cautiously. Dr. Torres remained motionless as the dragon investigated her, allowing him to set the pace of their introduction. After several minutes, Echo made a decision. He sat down in front of Dr. Torres and made a series of complex vocalizations, his tone clearly questioning. Dr. Torres's eyes widened. He's asking who I am and why I'm here. His dialect is, it's not military, it's definitely civilian, probably from one of the outer colonies. What does that mean? Sarah asked. It means he's not a soldier's child. He's from a family of farmers or merchants or teachers. His parents were probably killed when their colony was evacuated. The weight of Echo's loss hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd known he was an orphan, but somehow hearing the scientific confirmation made it more real. This beautiful, gentle creature had lost everything before she found him. Echo must have sensed her distress because he immediately moved to her side, nuzzling against her leg with a soft, comforting purr. Dr. Torres observed this interaction with fascination. The bond between you is remarkable. He's reading your emotional state and responding appropriately. That level of empathy typically only develops between dragons who've been together for years. Over the next 2 hours, Dr. Torres conducted a thorough examination of Echo with Sarah's help. The dragon tolerated the attention patiently, seeming to understand that this human was different from the others, that she truly understood his species. His development is perfect, Dr. Torres announced finally. Better than perfect, actually. Most young dragons raised in captivity show signs of stress and malnutrition. Echo is healthier than many dragons I studied who were raised by their own families. Sarah's taken incredible care of him, Dr. Chen said proudly. It's not just the physical care, Dr. Torres replied, watching as Echo curled up next to Sarah. Dragons are highly social creatures. They need emotional connection to thrive. Sarah hasn't just fed and sheltered him. She's loved him. That's made all the difference. But Dr. Torres also delivered sobering news about Echo's future. He's going to keep growing for another 2 years at least. Adult dragons can reach wingspans of 20 feet or more. Even if you could keep hiding him, he'll eventually be too large for any building. So what are our options? Marcus asked. Dr. Torres was quiet for a long moment, watching Echo sleep peacefully against Sarah's side. When she spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. There are 3 choices, and none of them are perfect. First, we could try to contact the Draconian Empire and arrange for Echo to be returned to his people. Sarah's arms tightened protectively around Echo. No. They abandoned him when they retreated. Besides, we don't even know if they'd accept him back. Second option is to continue as you have been, but with better resources and support. I could help you find a permanent sanctuary, somewhere safe where Echo could live freely. That sounds better, Sarah said hopefully. The third option, Dr. Torres continued, is the most dangerous but potentially the most important. We could go public. The hangar fell silent except for the sound of Echo's gentle breathing. Public, Sarah whispered. Think about it, Dr. Torres said earnestly. The entire war was fought because both species feared each other. Humans saw dragons as monsters and dragons saw humans as conquerors. But here's proof that our species can not only coexist but form deep, loving bonds. They'd take him away, Sarah said immediately. Maybe. Or maybe seeing Echo's story could change everything. One young woman's compassion for an orphaned alien could be the bridge that leads to real peace between our peoples. Dr. Chen shook his head. The risk is too great. If the government seizes Echo, they could use him for experiments or worse. Or, Dr. Torres countered, his story could touch enough hearts that public opinion would protect him. Sometimes the greatest changes come from the smallest acts of kindness. Sarah looked down at Echo, sleeping trustingly in her arms. In 10 months, he'd gone from a dying hatchling to a magnificent young dragon. But more than that, he'd become her family. The thought of losing him was unbearable. I need time to think, she said finally. Of course, Dr. Torres agreed. But Sarah, you should know that Echo won't stay hidden much longer regardless of what we decide. He's entering adolescence. Soon he'll start vocalizing in frequencies that will carry for miles. His instincts will drive him to seek out other dragons, and if he can't find them, he'll become increasingly distressed. As if to emphasize her point, Echo stirred in his sleep and let out a low, mournful call that echoed through the hangar. It was a sound Sarah had never heard him make before, but somehow she understood its meaning. He was calling for his family. Dr. Torres heard it too, and her expression softened with sadness. He's starting to feel the loneliness. All young dragons go through this phase. In the wild, it's when they begin learning complex social behaviors from their clan. What happens if he doesn't find other dragons? Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Some adapt and find surrogate families like Echo has with you. Others become increasingly isolated and depressed. A few, Dr. Torres hesitated. A few simply stop eating and waste away. The weight of responsibility settled heavier on Sarah's shoulders. It wasn't enough anymore to just love Echo and keep him safe. She had to think about what was best for him, even if it broke her heart. As dawn approached and they prepared to return Echo to his hiding place at the clinic, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I want to meet with someone from the government," she said quietly, not to surrender Echo but to explore the possibility of making his existence official somehow. Dr. Torres nodded approvingly. "I know someone who might help. A friend at the State Department who was involved in the peace negotiations. She's one of the few people in government who believes coexistence is possible." "This is insane," Dr. Chen muttered, but Sarah could see he understood why she had to try. As they loaded Echo back into the transport van, the dragon looked up at Sarah with his golden eyes and made a soft questioning sound. "I don't know what's going to happen, baby," Sarah whispered, "but I promise you whatever we do, we'll do it together." Echo nuzzled her hand and settled down for the ride back to his temporary home. But Sarah noticed he kept looking toward the hangar doors, toward the sky that called to his very soul. Time was running out, and soon they would all have to face the consequences of a choice made 10 months ago in a rainy alley behind a small-town diner. Ambassador Maria Santos was the last person Sarah had expected to meet in Dr. Torres's university office on a quiet Thursday afternoon. The elegant woman in her 40s had been instrumental in negotiating the ceasefire with the Draconian Empire, and her reputation for both brilliance and discretion was legendary. "Dr. Torres has told me something extraordinary," Ambassador Santos said, her dark eyes studying Sarah intently. "But I need to hear it from you directly. In your own words, tell me about Echo." Sarah had rehearsed this moment for days, but sitting across from one of the most powerful diplomats in the world, her carefully prepared speech evaporated. Instead, she found herself telling the simple truth. "I found him dying in the rain and I couldn't walk away." For the next hour, Sarah shared Echo's story. She showed pictures and videos on her phone, from those first desperate nights in the diner's storage room to his magnificent flights in Marcus's hangar. Ambassador Santos listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. When Sarah finished, the office fell silent except for the ticking of Dr. Torres's antique clock. "This dragon," Ambassador Santos said finally, "you call him Echo. What do you know about his real name, his family?" "Dr. Torres thinks he's from one of the outer colonies. His parents were probably killed during the evacuation." Ambassador Santos nodded slowly. 3 colonies were completely destroyed in the final months of the war. Kepler Fort Fofkeidu B Ross 100 B and Proxima Centauri C. Thousands of dragon families were killed or separated during the chaos of evacuation. She pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of official documents. "These are the casualty reports from those colonies. Hundreds of hatchlings and juveniles were listed as missing, presumed dead." Sarah's heart clenched as she realized the scope of the tragedy. Echo wasn't just an orphan. He was one of hundreds of children who had lost everything. "Why are you showing me this?" Sarah asked. "Because context matters," Ambassador Santos replied. "What you've done isn't just remarkable for its compassion. It's politically significant. You've proven that humans and dragons can form genuine bonds even in the aftermath of war." Dr. Torres leaned forward. "Maria, what are you thinking?" Ambassador Santos was quiet for a moment, then made a decision that would change everything. "I want to meet Echo." 3 days later, they gathered again at Marcus's hangar, but this time the stakes felt infinitely higher. Ambassador Santos arrived in an unmarked government vehicle with a small security detail, who remained outside at her insistence. Echo had grown noticeably even in the few days since Dr. Torres's visit. His wingspan now approached 7 feet, and his scales had developed an almost metallic sheen. More importantly, his vocalizations had become deeper and more complex, carrying new harmonics that seemed to resonate in Sarah's chest. When Ambassador Santos entered the hangar, Echo immediately positioned himself protectively in front of Sarah. His scales shifted to a deep amber color that Sarah had learned indicated wariness mixed with determination to protect. "It's okay, Echo," Sarah said softly. She's a friend, but Echo wasn't taking any chances. He spread his wings slightly in a display that, while not aggressive, clearly communicated that he was prepared to defend his bonded human. Ambassador Santos stopped well back from the dragon and slowly raised her hands, palms open in the universal gesture of peaceful intent. Then, to everyone's amazement, she began speaking in what sounded like the dragon language Dr. Torres had used. Echo's head snapped up in shock. His scales rippled through a rapid sequence of colors, and he made a series of urgent questioning calls. "What did you say to him?" Sarah asked, alarmed by Echo's obvious distress. "I introduced myself using proper diplomatic protocols," Ambassador Santos explained, her eyes never leaving Echo. But his response, "Dr. Torres, is he saying what I think he's saying?" Dr. Torres was listening intently to Echo's continued vocalizations, her face growing pale. "He's asking about his clan, his family name. He wants to know if we have word of survivors from his colony." Sarah's heart broke as she understood. Echo wasn't just excited to hear his native language. He was desperate for news of his people. Ambassador Santos approached slowly, continuing to speak in the dragon tongue. Echo responded with increasingly complex calls, and Sarah could see the intelligence in his golden eyes as he tried to communicate something important. "He's telling us his real name," Dr. Torres translated, tears in her eyes. "It's not Echo. His name is Kethril, son of Vorthak, of the Silver Scale clan from Proxima Centauri C." "Kethril," Sarah repeated softly, and the dragon turned to her with a sound that was part purr, part trill, even though she'd given him the name Echo. Hearing his real name felt like meeting him all over again. Ambassador Santos spoke again in dragon, and Kethril's response was immediate and passionate. "What's he saying now?" Sarah asked. "He's talking about you," Ambassador Santos said, wonder creeping into her voice. "He's explaining the bond between you, but he's using terms I've never heard before. Dr. Torres, can you make sense of this?" Dr. Torres was frantically taking notes as Kethril continued speaking. "He's using the ancient bonding terminology, the sacred phrases. Sarah, he's not just saying you saved him. He's claiming you as Kethmiran." "What does that mean?" "It means Soul Mother," Dr. Torres whispered. "It's the highest honor a dragon can bestow on another being. It means he considers you family in the deepest possible sense." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she looked at Kethril. He approached her slowly and gently touched his forehead to hers, a gesture she now understood was profoundly significant in dragon culture. Ambassador Santos watched this interaction with growing excitement. "This is even more extraordinary than I hoped. A Kethmiran bond hasn't been documented between species in over 1,000 years of dragon history. What does this mean for Kethril?" Sarah asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "It means," Ambassador Santos said carefully, "that according to dragon law, you have as much right to speak for him as any biological family member would. More importantly, it means his people would be honor-bound to respect your bond." The implications hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. "His people? You mean other dragons?" "The Draconian Empire didn't retreat into empty space," Ambassador Santos explained. "They've established several refugee colonies in neutral territory. There are survivors from Proxima Centauri C living on one of those colonies." Kethril had been following the conversation intently, and now he made a series of urgent calls. "He understands," Dr. Torres translated. "He's asking if his clanmates are alive." Ambassador Santos nodded slowly. "Some are. 17 survivors from the Silverscale clan made it to the refugee colony on Titan Station, including—" She paused, checking her tablet, "including his cousin Zafira, daughter of Morveth." Kethril's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He threw back his head and let out a call that was pure joy, a sound so beautiful and haunting that it brought tears to everyone's eyes. For the first time since Sarah had found him, Kethril knew he wasn't alone in the universe. But Sarah felt her heart breaking even as she rejoiced for him. If Kethril had living family, didn't he belong with them? Didn't he deserve to be with his own kind? As if reading her thoughts, Kethril turned to her and made a soft, questioning sound. Ambassador Santos translated, "He's asking if you would go with him to meet his family." "What?" Sarah gasped. "Titan Station is neutral territory," Ambassador Santos explained, As his Kethmiran, you would be welcome there. But more than that, Sarah, your presence could open diplomatic channels we've never had before. A human who has earned the sacred bond of a dragon would be respected beyond measure. Sarah looked at Kethril, this magnificent creature she'd raised from a dying hatchling. In the past year, he'd become the center of her world, but she'd always known this day would come. When? She asked quietly. There's a transport leaving for the outer colonies next month, Ambassador Santos said. I could arrange passage for both of you with full diplomatic protection. And if I choose not to go? Ambassador Santos's expression grew serious. Then Kethril faces an impossible choice between his species and his bonded family. Sarah, dragons who are forced to make that choice often become seriously depressed. Some never recover. Sarah knelt down next to Kethril, who immediately curled his long neck around her shoulders. She'd spent a year protecting him, but now it seemed the best way to protect him was to let him go. I need to think about this, she said finally. But as Kethril purred against her shoulder and Ambassador Santos began explaining the logistics of interstellar travel, Sarah realized her decision was already made. She couldn't condemn Kethril to a life of isolation, not when his family was waiting. The question wasn't whether she would go with him to Titan Station. The question was whether she was brave enough to leave everything she'd ever known for a dragon who had already given her more love than she'd ever thought possible. As they prepared to leave the hangar, Kethril looked up at the stars visible through the open doors and made a soft, hopeful sound. For the first time in over a year, he was looking toward home, and Sarah realized that wherever Kethril was, that's where her home would be too. The month before departure passed in a blur of preparations and emotions Sarah had never imagined. She quit her job at Mel's diner, explaining to her confused boss that she'd received an incredible opportunity abroad. She sold most of her possessions and arranged to have the rest stored. Saying goodbye to her small apartment felt like closing a chapter of her life. Dr. Chen and Marcus had become like family during the long months of secrecy, and leaving them was almost as difficult as leaving Earth itself. I can't believe you're actually doing this, Dr. Chen said on their last evening together at the clinic. Kethril was demonstrating his improved flying skills, performing complex aerial maneuvers that showcased his growing strength and grace. I can't believe it either, Sarah admitted. 6 months ago I was just a waitress trying to pay rent. Now I'm about to become humanity's first dragon ambassador. That's essentially what you are, Dr. Chen pointed out. Ambassador Santos wasn't exaggerating when she said your bond with Kethril could change interspecies relations. You're pioneering something completely new. Sarah watched Kethril execute a perfect landing, his movements now fluid and confident. In the year since she'd found him, he'd grown from a dying hatchling into a magnificent young adult. His wingspan now exceeded 8 feet, and his scales had developed intricate patterns that Dr. Torres said indicated high intelligence and noble lineage. But more than his physical growth, Kethril had developed into a complex personality. He was playful and curious, gentle with smaller creatures but fiercely protective of those he loved. He'd learned to understand dozens of human words and could communicate complex ideas through combinations of vocalizations and body language. The bond between them had deepened beyond anything Sarah had thought possible. Kethril could sense her moods from across a room and often seemed to know what she was thinking before she spoke. In return, Sarah had developed an almost mystical understanding of the dragon's needs and feelings. Are you scared? Marcus asked as they watched Kethril practice aerial acrobatics. Terrified, Sarah admitted. I'm about to travel to an alien space station where I don't speak the language, don't understand the culture, and have no idea what to expect. But when I look at Kethril, I know it's right. He needs to be with his people. The journey to Titan Station would take 3 weeks aboard a diplomatic vessel. Ambassador Santos had arranged for Sarah to have a crash course in dragon culture and basic language during the trip, along with briefings on the political situation in the neutral colonies. The dragon refugees have been living on Titan Station for 8 months, Ambassador Santos explained during one of their pre-departure meetings. They're survivors from multiple colonies representing dozens of different clans. The political dynamics are complex and tensions run high between those who want to continue the war and those who support peace. What about Kethril's family? Sarah asked. The Silverscale clan is generally considered moderate. They support peaceful coexistence, which is one reason I'm optimistic about this mission. Kethril's cousin Zephyra has become something of a leader among the younger dragons. On the morning of departure, Sarah stood in the hangar one last time with the small group of humans who had become Echo's extended family. Kethril seemed to understand the significance of the moment. He approached each person individually, touching his forehead to theirs in the dragon gesture of respect and gratitude. When he came to Dr. Chen, Kethril made a series of complex vocalizations that brought tears to the veterinarian's eyes. "He's thanking you for healing him," Dr. Torres translated. "He's also promising to remember your kindness always." With Marcus, Kethril's message was different. "He's thanking you for giving him the sky," Dr. Torres said. "He says the gift of flight was the gift of freedom." But with Dr. Torres, Kethril's communication was the most complex of all. He spoke for several minutes in rapid dragon speech, his tone formal and ceremonial. "He's asking me to be the keeper of his Earth story," Dr. Torres explained, wiping away tears. "In dragon culture, important events are preserved through designated storytellers. He wants me to make sure his time with Sarah is remembered accurately." Finally, Kethril turned to Sarah. Instead of speaking, he simply wrapped his long neck around her shoulders and held her close. No words were needed for what passed between them in that moment. The diplomatic transport ship Harmony was sleek and efficient, designed for long-range missions to the outer colonies. Sarah's quarters were small but comfortable, with a viewport that showed the slowly shrinking Earth as they departed. Kethril had a specially designed cabin next to hers, large enough for him to move freely and with direct access to Sarah's quarters. During the first days of the journey, he spent most of his time pressed against the shared wall, clearly anxious about the separation from everything familiar. Ambassador Santos proved to be an excellent teacher, and Sarah threw herself into learning everything she could about dragon culture. The language was incredibly complex, with tonal variations that could completely change meaning. But Sarah discovered she had an aptitude for it, perhaps developed through her year of communicating with Kethril. Dragons place enormous importance on family bonds and clan loyalty, Ambassador Santos explained during one of their lessons. The concept of Kethmiran is sacred to them. By accepting you as Soul Mother, Kethril has essentially made you a member of the Silver Scale clan. "What does that mean practically?" Sarah asked. "It means his family is honor-bound to accept you as one of their own, but it also means you'll be expected to participate in clan decisions and rituals. You're not just visiting Kethril's people, Sarah. You're joining them." As the days passed, Kethril began to show signs of anticipation mixed with nervousness. He started spending hours at his cabin's viewport staring out at the stars. His vocalizations became more frequent and complex, and Sarah realized he was practicing formal speech patterns he would need when meeting his clan. "He's nervous about how they'll receive him," Dr. Torres observed during one of their daily video calls. "He's been away for over a year and he's bonded with a human. That's unprecedented in dragon society." Sarah felt a growing anxiety about the reunion. What if Kethril's family rejected him because of his bond with her? What if they tried to separate them? The thought of losing Kethril after everything they'd been through was unbearable. Her fears intensified when they received a communication from Titan Station 2 weeks into the journey. Ambassador Santos's expression was grave as she shared the news. "There's been some resistance to our arrival, not from Kethril's family, but from some of the more militant dragon factions. They see a human's presence on the station as a potential threat." "What kind of resistance?" Sarah asked, her stomach clenching. "Protests mainly. Some demands that you be refused entry. The station administrators are committed to honoring diplomatic protocols, but the situation is tense." That night, Sarah shared her fears with Kethril. He listened intently as she explained what Ambassador Santos had told her, his golden eyes reflecting her worry. When she finished, Kethril made a series of determined calls that needed no translation. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together. "I know, baby," Sarah whispered, stroking his scales. "Whatever happens, we're family. Nothing can change that." But as the Harmony continued its journey toward Titan Station, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of their adventure was still ahead. They'd survived a year of hiding on Earth, but now they would have to prove that the bond between a human and a dragon could withstand the prejudices and fears of two species still learning to trust each other. On the final night before arrival, Sarah stood at her viewport watching Titan Station grow larger in the distance. The massive structure housed over 10,000 dragon refugees, representing the largest concentration of the species outside their home territories. Somewhere on that station, Kethral's family was waiting to meet the human who had become their lost clan members, Kethmaran. Sarah only hoped she would prove worthy of the sacred trust Kethral had placed in her. As if sensing her thoughts, Kethral appeared beside her, his presence warm and reassuring. Together they watched their destination approach, two unlikely souls bound by love and facing an uncertain future, with courage born of absolute trust in each other. Titan Station was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. The massive structure stretched for miles, its curved sections designed to accommodate dragons in flight. Through the docking bay's transparent walls, she could see hundreds of the magnificent creatures soaring through vast open spaces, their scales catching the artificial sunlight in brilliant displays of color. The reception committee waiting for them was both impressive and intimidating. 12 adult dragons arranged themselves in formal formation, their wingspans ranging from 15 to nearly 25 feet. At their center stood a dragon whose scales shimmered between silver and deep blue, marking her as a member of the Silverscale clan. "That's Zephyra," Ambassador Santos murmured as they disembarked, Kethral's cousin. Kethral had been silent during the docking procedure, but now he began making soft, nervous calls. Sarah could feel his tension through their bond, and she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Zephyra stepped forward and spoke in formal dragon speech, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the docking bay. Ambassador Santos translated quietly. "She's welcoming Kethral home and acknowledging his safe return to the clan. Now she's asking him to present his Kethmaran for formal recognition." Kethral drew himself up to his full height and responded with equal formality. His voice had deepened significantly during their journey, and Sarah was amazed at how dignified he sounded speaking his native language. "He's introducing you properly," Ambassador Santos continued. "He's explaining how you found him, cared for him, and earned the sacred bond. He's also stating that any challenge to your status must go through him first." Sarah felt a surge of pride and protectiveness. Even facing his own family for the first time in over a year, Kethral was making it clear that their bond was not negotiable. Zephyra's response was lengthy and complex. As she spoke, her scales shifted through a spectrum of colors that Sarah was beginning to recognize as emotional indicators. The formal silver blue gave way to warmer gold and green tones. "She's accepting you into the clan," Ambassador Santos translated, wonder in her voice. "But more than that, she's expressing gratitude for your care of Kethral and amazement at the depth of your bond." The formal ceremony continued for nearly an hour, with each member of the reception committee speaking in turn. Some were clearly more welcoming than others, but none openly challenged Sarah's presence. When it was over, Zephyra approached Sarah directly. The massive dragon lowered her great head until she was at eye level with the small human. When she spoke, her voice was gentler than the formal tones she'd used earlier. "She's speaking directly to you now," Ambassador Santos said. "She says she can see why Kethral chose you as Kethmaran. She says you have the heart of a true clan mother." Sarah bowed respectfully as Ambassador Santos had taught her. "Please tell her I'm honored to be welcomed into the Silverscale clan, and that I promise to always protect and care for Kethral." When this was translated, Zephyra made a sound that was clearly approving. She responded with what sounded like an invitation. "She wants to show you and Kethral to your quarters, and then introduce you to the rest of the clan," Ambassador Santos explained. The living spaces designed for dragons were magnificent, high ceilings, broad corridors, and wide windows that could accommodate creatures with massive wingspans. Sarah's quarters were smaller but comfortable, connected to Kethral's by a shared common area. "This is your home now," Zephyra explained through Ambassador Santos, who would be staying for several more days to help with the transition. "Kethral has been away too long. We have much to teach him about changes in clan structure and politics." Over the following days, Sarah witnessed Kethral's joyful reunion with his extended family. There were tearful meetings with relatives who had feared him dead, playful interactions with younger clan members who were fascinated by his stories of Earth, and serious discussions with elders who wanted to understand his experiences. But the most emotional moment came when Zephyra showed them a memorial wall honoring clan members lost during the war. Kethral's name was carved there, along with those of his parents and siblings. Kethral stood before the wall for a long time, making soft, keening sounds that Sarah recognized as grief. When Zephyra gently explained that his parents had been confirmed killed during the evacuation of Proxima Centauri C, Kethrill's anguish was heartbreaking to witness. Sarah went to him immediately, wrapping her arms around his neck as she had so many times during their year together. Kethrill buried his head against her shoulder and wept, the sound echoing through the memorial chamber. "He's been hoping they might still be alive," Zephyra said softly in careful English she'd been learning. "Now he knows the truth." "But he also knows he's not alone," Sarah replied, holding Kethrill close. "He has his clan and he has me. We're his family now." Zephyra watched this interaction with obvious fascination. Later she confided to Sarah that she'd never seen such emotional intimacy between a dragon and another species. "Dragons mate for life," she explained through Ambassador Santos. "But the Kethmiran bond is different. It transcends species, transcends even death. You and Kethrill are connected at the soul level." As the days passed, Sarah began to understand the complex social dynamics of the refugee community. The dragons were struggling to rebuild their culture while living in an artificial environment. There were tensions between different clans, disagreements about whether to seek revenge for the war or pursue peace, and the constant underlying grief for lost homeworlds. But there was also hope. The younger dragons especially were fascinated by Sarah's presence and eager to learn about human culture. They peppered her with questions about Earth, about human families, about how she had learned to understand Kethrill so well. "You represent possibility," Zephyra told her one evening as they watched Kethrill playing with a group of adolescent dragons. "For a year we've been living with the assumption that humans and dragons could never truly coexist. But you've proven that wrong." Sarah was amazed at how quickly she adapted to life among the dragons. Their social customs became familiar. Their language began to make sense, and their complex emotional expressions no longer seemed alien. More than that, she found herself genuinely caring about the welfare of the clan and the broader refugee community. 3 weeks after their arrival, Sarah faced her first major test as Kethrill's Kethmiran. A dispute arose between the Silverscale clan and the more militant Ironwing clan over resource allocation in the station's living quarters. Traditionally, such disputes were resolved by combat between clan champions, but the station administrators had banned fighting. Instead, the clans agreed to accept the judgment of neutral arbitrators. To everyone's surprise, the Ironwing clan specifically requested that Sarah serve as one of the arbitrators. Claiming that as the only human on the station, she had no clan bias. "This is unprecedented," Zephyra warned. "If you accept, your decision will carry enormous weight. But if you make an enemy of either clan, it could put both you and Kethrill in danger." Sarah spent hours studying the dispute, interviewing representatives from both clans, and examining the station's resource allocation records. The issue was complex, involving historical grievances dating back to the evacuation and conflicting interpretations of traditional clan law. In the end, Sarah's solution was elegantly simple. Instead of choosing sides, she proposed a rotating system that would give both clans equal access to the disputed spaces over time. More importantly, she suggested creating joint activities that would require the clans to work together. Both clans accepted her judgment, and the precedent was set. Within weeks, Sarah found herself regularly consulted on disputes throughout the station. Her reputation as a fair and creative problem solver spread beyond the dragon community to the station's human administrators. "You're becoming quite the diplomat," Ambassador Santos observed during one of their weekly video calls. "The station's reports about your integration have been extraordinary. There's serious discussion in the State Department about offering you a formal diplomatic position." Sarah looked out at the great central space where Kethrill was flying with his cousin and several friends. His joy at being reunited with his people was obvious in every graceful movement, every playful call. But he still spent his evenings with Sarah, still sought her comfort when he was troubled, still looked to her for guidance on important decisions. "I don't know about a diplomatic career," Sarah said, "but I know I belong here. These aren't just Kethrill's people anymore. They're my people too." 6 months after arriving at Titan Station, Sarah received news that would change everything once again. The Draconian Empire had formally requested a peace summit, and they specifically asked that Sarah attend as a human representative. "They've heard about the Kethmiran bond," Ambassador Santos explained during an emergency video conference. They want to meet the human who has been accepted into a dragon clan. Sarah, this could be the beginning of real peace between our species. That night, Sarah sat with Kethril in their shared quarters, watching the stars through the great windows. He was no longer the frightened hatchling she'd found in an alley, but a magnificent adult dragon respected by his clan and beloved by his adoptive mother.